But I do need it because I have to learn it.
So while the poet artist Bart White is testing his work, yeah, I'm gonna make an announcement, Bart. Don't worry. So welcome everybody. Welcome. Hopefully the feedback is not going to be too bad on this. We'll fix that. I promise. Welcome to the Finger Lakes Art Series. Another installment. This is technically the February installment, but because of my own scheduling problems, we had to move it to the beginning of March. So thank you, Jessica, for making that adjustment. And not saying that was easy. That's what we like. That's what we like to hear.
That's what we got sunshine today.
That this is the best experience you've ever had with a series. Oh, so we are really lucky tonight. We have Jessica Cuello here from Syracuse, fabulous poet. And we have lots of other people in the audience, lots of other fabulous poets and writers. So this should be a great night. And I'll just make a couple of quick announcements, if that's okay. In March, this guy named George Gaida, that's me, is launching his new novel from Guernica Editions. And that's on March 29th, Friday, same time, same day of the week, 4 weeks from today. Yeah, so happy about that. Happy too that Tony Luzzi is joining us in April. He'll be coming to read. Tony is a Rochester resident and also happens to have connections to Dansville, so it's nice to get him here. And then William Duvall is coming from California in May. And I don't know what's happening yet in June, but I suspect that Michael Zanacki may be reading you in June. If it works out, right? We're hoping. Okay. And there's more, but we'll save that for a later date. Okay. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jessica. Just say a few words about her. Her poetry is terrific. She's like her poetry career is going like this. I think it's fair to say. Yeah, I think so. Jessica Cuello's most recent book is Yours Creature, Jackleg Press, 2023. Her book, Liar, selected by Dorian Locks, was for the 2020 Barrow Street Book Prize, was honored with the Eugene Nasser Prize. And this is proving to me how bad my eyes are, Jessica. Oh my God. I can't read anymore. It's so sad when this happens.
Enough.
No. I'll just make it bigger. So she's gotten a lot of awards, really a lot of awards. And let's see. She is also the author of Hunt. I like to mention the books, From the Word Works, 2017, and Pricking from Tiger Bark Press, 2016. She's been awarded a lot of other prizes, many prizes, including the New Letters Poetry Prize and the Salt and Salt Fellowship. And let's see. In 2014, she was awarded the Decker Award from Helms University. She is poetry editor at Tahoma Literary Review, and she teaches French in the New York State public school system near Syracuse. Jessica, take it away. Take the mic from me, please.
Thank you. I'm bringing my water here. Oh, I love this space. It's really cool. Thank you so much for having me, George.
Pleasure.
It's beautiful. And thank you everyone who came out and people who came out to read. I look forward to hearing you read, and people who drove from Rochester and Olean. It means a lot. So as George mentioned, the book that just came out actually came out in May, but that's the book that's on my mind. So that's the book I'm reading from. It's this book. It's called Yours Creature, and the whole book is a series of epistolary poems in the voice of Mary Shelley. And she's writing letters to her mother, the feminist and activist Mary Wollstonecraft, who died 11 days after she was born from an infection. And then some of the poems are addressed to her creature, the monster in Frankenstein, and some are addressed to years. So the book moves chronologically. The first poem begins at her birth, and it was the night also of a very famous comet identified by a woman astronomer. Dear mother, I wanted to crawl back into the black interior of you, womb scratched by an animal, but they wouldn't let me. I hung apart like gallows men, dangling for sweet touch. A line from the red radius of your womb went dark. That night, the whole of London raised its eyes to watch the comet pass, except for us. Instead, my currish cry and snarl, my cuss, my cut and run, my cutting tooth, made death. Your daughter, Mary Shelley. It's kind of a weird note with that one. George and I might talk later about historical imagination, but the placenta wouldn't come out, and they brought in puppies to nurse at her breast, thinking that would expel the placenta. And then she died actually from an infection when the doctor tried pulling it out of her. Otherwise, she may have lived. It kind of explains Frankenstein a little bit, I think. And then her father was Godwin, who was a scholar, and Godwin is the reason that Percy Shelley showed up at their home, and they fell in love as teenagers. And whenever I mention the initial G, that refers to Godwin, and P in the poems refers to Percy. I'm sorry, guys, but the men, they're just initials. It's not really their story, you know. Dear mother, I watched G's fingers on the page, neck with a faint line. Neck you loved, so I love it too. He is the glaze through which I see the sun. We call the goat's beard in our field, sweet meadow, go to bed at noon, and wise father men. I touch the feathered heads to feel the god of it. At Chalk Farm we drink the cream of syllabubs. Sister holds my arm, but I am the apple of his eye. I am the reader of his work. His frown can collapse my spine. His grief for you becomes a pillar my attention winds onto. Are you mad that I took your... G is mad with his glacial love and becomes more so despite my maniacal reading toward love. A child can kill its mother, baby wet and monstrous, slipping with eyes opened, black and white, the stewed creation, not asking to be born, but requiring. And this one has a quote from Coleridge, who was a visitor in their home when she was a girl. The cadaverous silence of Godwin's children is quite catacombs. Dear mother, silence was my pride, my object stillness, the quiet prize. My brain was a carnation on a stem, made my God of a father look at me. Quiet petals and silver pages.
Hold on.
Is this part of the reading?
I mean, I can make it. It came in with,
Outside.
I mean, I can incorporate it. I meant to read until I was his perfect daughter, but P put one hand beneath my smock and all the untouched years responded. Godwin had nothing to hold me with. I didn't know he'd snap me like a stem and toss me on a pile of exile. He was my God, first partner, the sun to my green tissue. He sent me letters with formal closings, as though I was still plicate in my room, leaf ribs pointed toward him, plumule hidden from all but him. Mother, you didn't raise me. Mary Shelley. Dear Sweden, 1795. She wrote that an enlarged mind is no use, and muttered over her dead friend. She could not mutter over me unborn, a fire not yet in her eye. She still gazed toward the bridge's ledge. She didn't know I would do it for her, be her little murderer. My own afterbirths came out like floors of flesh, pink animals the child and I needed together. Hers stayed inside the first room of death. They put me in a stranger's arms. But back when they pulled her from the river where she tried to drown, the room I would occupy in her was warm. Yours in London, 1820. MS. This one has a line from one of her letters, and you may know this detail of her life, that she had 4 children, but only one lived past childhood. Dear Mother, I had a dream that my little baby came to life again. What is it to make a life that dies? Like God, it cannot stand to stay. Cabbage leaves are soft like cloth and smell of tea. I wore them on my breast like medicine. The earthy taste of tea made me hate my flesh. I didn't know if I was made of anything else. Her 13 days were the only time, and they had no measure. Clouds swirled like bands of twisted cloth. I'm sorry to burden you. As a child, I was spooked by the empty hall when Father moved us in. At first, he loved me like I was you, and in the dream, we rubbed it by the fire and it lived. Yours as ever, Mary. This poem references the famous summer where she wrote Frankenstein with Shelley and Byron, and it was called The Year Without a Summer because there was a volcanic eruption that filled the air with ash. And the summer this book came out was the summer of all the fires up here. So I would read it and think about yeah, when we couldn't go outside and breathe. Dear Mother, I was aware of you the year without a summer. The sunlight reddened. My hands, too, were weather backward. People looted the warehouses of grain. It rained red, but we remained corded, issued from the other. It rained 100 days. The river came to new marks. The world matched our minds. And I invented a doctor who cobbled together a man. I who copy you, Mary. Dear creature, the sea of ice was my favorite distraction. We kept a squirrel inside a box who bit me. P carried him for a while. The way he carried kindness, useless and external, like a man. At night when we read Christabel, P thought my nipples were eyes. He ran away, afraid. I suppose each hole of my body is an eye, especially my mouth, repulsed by the heat of its need. Your monstrous creator, M.S. Dear creature, P and I read each other's writings, and I am relieved a little of desire. The child said, some beings don't live long, pointing to the dragonfly. In my womb, the child moved beneath the skin and lifted the surface in the shape of an arm. I thought how the other children's arms were tucked in and never seen, an arm against a sack of blue. Once the hardness of my mind dropped to the womb. Creature, you opened each brain window, a god that jumped from ear to ear. Sometimes I listened for you when I touched P. You came with his voice, his hand could draw you, your creator, M.S. I think I'm just going to do 2 more. Dear creature, I alternate between book and milk, pure air and burning sun. We took in a girl called Polly Rose. She kept my flowered plate. It's 9 months to make a life. Then you feed and rock their little forms. You worry them into morning, then worry them into night. At Bishopsgate, they carried out the coffers and the chairs. Money is an extra skin that keeps some safe. I tell my boy to stay away from damaged people. Holly's feet pass our bedroom. She is the neighbor's girl they couldn't feed. P brought her home. He gave away his shoes. Every woman is damage and witness, strung invisibly from baby to man. Your creator, M.S. Dear Mother, we rent a house in Italy. Black currants stain our fingerprints. We write in red, mother and child. My skin remembers P's glyptic touch, the sex we had beside your grave. When I was 15, his words were earnest like a slingshot. We gospelized you. I prepare fermented fish. The tiny blade lifts the bones like threads. P is a genius of wonder and invention. Not one domestic task takes his attention, and I, in the kitchen, am a genius of famine. Your loving daughter, Mary Shelley. Thank you for listening.
Can I ask you to stay up there?
Oh, sure, yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So I don't want to get up.
I didn't know there were two, so.
So, we're talking about historical imagination. Obviously, this book is a complete work of historical imagination.
Yes.
History is a large thing. How did you settle on Mary Shelley to devote? I mean, it takes a while to write a book of poems, especially a themed book where everything has to be carefully assembled. How did you decide on Mary Shelley, of all people, as the object?
So this one was kind of an accident between other books, and it came about because I couldn't sleep at night, and I discovered that it was reading either fiction and poetry that kept me up. So I went and got some literary biographies, and I thought these will be like kind of dull enough, that they'll put me to sleep. But one of the books I checked out was this dual biography by Charlotte Gordon, and it alternates chapters between Shelley and then her mother, Wollstonecraft, and sort of draws parallel connections in their lives. And it's a beautiful book, gorgeous, it's really well written, and it was super stimulating.
Yeah.
So it did not solve my insomnia problems, but
Yeah.
I did start writing these poems in the form of letters. And then I went back and I started doing all of the research, like rereading more biographies and reading some of Wollstonecraft's work that I hadn't read, and rereading Shelley's work and her letters. And I have another book that's also historical, and I don't think this is true for everyone, but for me, I do a lot of research. When I say research, I just read books. I don't know if that's legit research, but I read books, and then most of the information doesn't make it into the poems. It's like I just sort of float in the information and float in the world and the language, but a lot of the details that are so. For this book, I probably wrote 4 times. It was 4 times longer. Like I wrote so many poems because the details of her life were so fascinating, but they weren't lyrical. So I couldn't include them.
Could you talk about that's a word that we throw around a lot, lyrical.
Yeah.
Could you talk about what you mean by lyrical?
So, there's so much information in these poems, and the balance. I'm defining lyrical by kind of defining what it isn't to start. And I was very drawn to the historical facts, like the puppies nursing, and Percy Shelley's death, and all of her children, and all of those details didn't work in the poems directly because the language, not all informational language works this way, but if you're just focusing on the information, you might be missing music. And for me, lyric, it's not just that it's musical, it's that the language is doing something. Okay, I'm going to try to describe what I think this is. I think in a really, really good poem, the language does something transcendent, where you enter the language and you have some kind of experience from the words, like incantatory, prayer-like, it takes you out of yourself. And some of the information just didn't do that, so I had to cut it. So, is that,
It makes sense.
yeah,
It's an interesting answer.
I don't know where that came from. These are the answers you're like, I don't know, I'll say something different tomorrow,
The
but,
choice of subject is great. I mean, I remember being fascinated by the Romantics in college, and I suspect maybe we had the same professor. You know, did you take Romantic
I did.
poetry? You
I
did.
did. I had Professor Plotkin. He was at
Okay.
Barnard.
Sorry,
He had a Scottish accent,
Oh, that's even better.
and he would quote Wordsworth
Yeah.
from memory. I had a huge crush on him. I mean, nobody else did because he wasn't really attractive physically, but I had the biggest crush on him.
You know,
People were like, "Really?"
your husband's there.
He's okay. He knew.
Okay.
He knew we were
I
dating.
know.
He knew. I said, "I have a big crush on this guy." He's like, "I can see it." We're not really jealous people.
That's good. Unlike the Romantics, who probably really were.
Yeah. Well, they were teenagers, really.
Yeah.
They were kids.
Yeah.
And then you really realize she was not an adult while she was writing. And then when she became an adult, her book was pretty, I'm not a big fan of her later books.
She was how old when she published Frankenstein?
Well, she wrote it, I think, at 17 or 18.
Yeah, that's insane.
And then the book she wrote in her 40s, it's like,
Yeah.
But I mean, that comes with a certain peace, probably. And maybe she was happy then.
Yeah.
Which is good. I hope she had some happy years, because she suffered. You know, I think the other thing that attracted to me was just the degree of suffering, which we don't really have to encounter. Like, just miscarrying, almost dying from your miscarriage, being abandoned, having a baby who dies in front of you, just that constant threat of death, of having children.
Yeah, a friend of mine wrote a book on Semmelweis, who was the doctor who basically
He's
pioneered,
figured out
hygiene.
that you should wash your hands.
Yeah, wash your hands, right.
Yeah.
And they didn't do this in 1820.
That's right.
Or whenever she was born, 17, whatever.
Yeah. In fact, one of my mentors, one of the poems, you know, I did the anachronistic thing where I don't reference Semmelweis, but I reference like a guilt in that. She goes, well, she wouldn't have known this because Semmelweis was later, and I'm like, that's okay. It's like the clock in Julius Caesar, you know. It's just.
So the voice is really important if you're writing historical work. How did you come to the voice? There were a lot of letters extant, right, of Mary Shelley's, but that doesn't really get you inside her mind completely. How did you develop the voice of the poems?
That's a hard question, and I don't think I think about that question when I write a book. I think if I don't feel a voice, I don't write the poems. Usually when I start writing, it's because I'm hearing some kind of a voice, or there's a compulsion for the voice. So something in that biography resonated. And I think it was also the letter, the idea of the epistolary form, where you're writing to someone that can't answer or may not answer, or you're going to be heard with silence. And that the letter's also a silent form too, right?
Yeah.
So.
So I have a quick question. So do you end up reading a whole bunch and getting more and more and more facts, and then pretty soon a pattern develops and you get this concept, and then it's like, oh, I have to grab this? Or do you read a small section and then get some thoughts from it? Or does it tend to be a lot of information and all together that gives you a theme?
I think both, because when I first read the book, I started writing right away as I was reading. And if I feel that feeling when I take it. Like if I want to write a poem, I try. If I am in a place where I can write a poem, I'll take it, because I think it's hard to write a poem. And then I could tell there was something resonant in the material. So when I started doing the research, I was writing at the same time.
Okay.
And it kind of came out, this was probably the fastest book I've ever written. Some of my other books took much longer, like 8 years versus this was like a 6-month book, which was unusual, but I think it was because it was such a cohesive, the form was very ready and the material was sort of already there. So once I knew how I wanted it to sound, that doesn't always happen, as you all know, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm not a writer, I'm a reader.
They're our favorite people. That's poets' favorite people in the world, and then librarians.
I'll ask a question. I've read your book Pricking as well. And,
Oh, thank you.
I was astonished really by the way, certainly the research comes through. And I didn't mind if I didn't, as with most great poetry that's written through history, I didn't mind that I maybe didn't get the reference in that line. It didn't matter because of we use the term lyricism. I'm curious about your process when you compose. Your poetry seems almost distilled. It's not cluttered. And that's what amazed me the most when I was reading it. And can you say briefly what your revision process is?
Yeah.
Because I suspect they weren't always this uncluttered.
No, well, first of all, thank you. That's a really nice compliment, because that is partly what I'm going for. And I do end up clearing out a lot of clutter. And I'm even at this book, like on the 9th hour before it was supposed to, final draft where you're just supposed to look for spelling error, I took out 5 poems because I thought they weren't quite strong enough. And I cut. And first I overwrite. I write by hand still in notebooks. So I'll just have notebooks going. And maybe I'll write 10 times the size of the book. And then I really distill and I cut away everything that is not like up to snuff, I guess, that's not lyrical, that's not moving the poem. So there's poems I love that I cut because they weren't moving the book forward, or lines that I liked the line, but it wasn't, which is painful to do. But I think there's a stage in revision at the end where I'm really not thinking about my own attachment to my work. I'm thinking about the work of art. It's something else, it's separate. And you have to serve the work of art. You're not serving your favorite poems, you're not serving your talent, you're not serving even your hard work, you're serving the art that someone's gonna read and you want it to please them. So they're gonna not read those 3 poems that I think are good, but they don't, they make it less good, they make the book less pleasurable. And I could be wrong, but yeah. And then I recycled all the notebooks in the recycling bin, which I know everyone does. And my husband, he's like, are you sure you want to do that? But I like to just be free of, because I used to have that idea, save everything, because there's going to be something in that you need. There's going to be a good line. But I have found that I get weighed down by my past writing and my past voice, and I get stuck in it. And I'm no longer that person, and so I like to clear out.
You need a Max Brod. Does everybody know the Max Brod story? Max Brod saved Franz Kafka's manuscripts from destruction. He was his best friend, and he's the one who went back and because Kafka just didn't care. And not that you don't care.
No, it could be a
There might
really,
be gems in there.
this is not advice. These are just my habits that could be really wrong. Yeah, that's just mentally, sometimes I just like to throw everything out too, I get really burdened by things and stuff and words and notebooks and so.
So when just to keep up with this revision question for a minute, how long do you need away from your manuscript to go back with those kind of clinical eyes and just really tear it apart? How, do you need, I always tell students you need to put that away for a couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
You need to, I mean, but in this case, it must be, was it months? You like put all you've written?
That, I've done the month thing, but it's very rare. I'm very obsessive about my writing, and I'll, even if I put it away, then I'll start opening it later. Or, like, I just sent a new manuscript out, but then I was driving to work, and I realized the line that would be better. So then I already sent it to one place, but then I went in during my study hall, I'm a public school teacher, and I started changing the lines. So, I don't really leave stuff alone. Which is probably why I wanna get rid of it, because it lives with me, but I like to be really close to it, and I think, and this could be an illusion, I think I can still edit carefully. Even without leaving it that much. Cause I sometimes I think that's not true, like that's a myth, that give it space, like I think that's true sometimes, but sometimes I think if you're like really looking at something and not obsessing of what you're looking, not like trying to, but you're just looking, you become so familiar with it.
Yeah.
You can also be very good at editing, which is counter to what is popular.
It's another
We don't.
theory. Yeah.
It's another theory.
Yeah.
I mean, I always tell my students to take space,
Right,
but I don't follow that.
yeah, I think I'm close to you. The arc of this book, since this is the book you've got right now and are out there with, could you describe the arc? Because it is, obviously, there's a narrative here. How would you describe the narrative?
So the narrative is pretty chronological by time. I like order. I like the order of that. It begins with her birth, and then it moves through her falling in love with Percy Shelley, and they go. They travel a little together to France. It follows the birth of her children, writing the book, and then it ends with his death. Yeah. So it's a very dense, tight space of time.
Final question, then I'll just open it up again. What was the what is for you the most difficult thing about writing poetry that's narrative based in history? What's the hard part? What's the hardest part?
I mean, I actually think I do it because it's an easy way. It's an easier way to write about. I mean, I think writing poetry is very hard because good poetry is vulnerable, and it's hard to be vulnerable with language. And like a historical mask is a way to enter something very safely, and it gives you a freedom. So I guess the hard part is, are you doing a disservice to, like, with Mary Shelley, if she read this book, be like, oh my God, I would never think that, I mean, it's not, someone in the Wollstonecraft Society asked for a copy because she wanted to read it, and I thought, oh no. Because the language is contemporary, and so was this book, Pricking, that this gentleman mentioned, which is about 13th century women in France, but it's very contemporary language.
They use the word, I did notice they used the word sex and she was talking about sex.
Yeah, she would never.
She probably would have said what? Relations?
I don't know, but I don't like that line.
Okay.
But I read that, I really like that poem, but I don't like that line, but it's printed, so. And once I started reading this book, I realized that's a line that I really need to rewrite, but
it is contemporary, but people would say.
Yeah, but it sticks out. I think so. You didn't think so.
It stuck out for me because it's the word sex, but that's
Well,
my own
the weird detail is that we don't have proof because we weren't there, but that she and Percy Shelley had sex at her mother's grave. I mean, this is very, why not? Yes, I mean.
Why?
Might be uncomfortable. But it's one of those, it's very romantic, right? I mean, it's.
If it says great, it could be just commemorating actually from my birth where I lost you, maybe something else can come.
Yeah, well, they were obsessed with her, she and Percy, and then her half-sister. And they tried to recreate Wollstonecraft. Wollstonecraft, when she was a young woman, went to France to look at the French Revolution. I mean, she was really ahead of her time. She had a baby, she wasn't married. She traveled trying to locate her lover on a ship through Scandinavia by herself with her infant. And she and Percy Shelley really admired Wollstonecraft. So they went to France to just see what she had seen and try to feel her experience. So I think Sex by Her Grave was about being close. It sounds so weird to us, but I think when your life's that short and people die, you're not, it sounds a little creepy, but I think the sensibility of that era, you don't have time to think about things being wholesome or not wholesome. And I think, having sex by her dead body was about accessing her mind and her spirit and being close to that intellectual life that I think Shelley must have felt the absence of her whole life. And then knowing that she had killed her with her birth. And only knowing her mother through her work and through her writing. And that writing was a way to know someone that you didn't know. And I think that's also why I picked the epistolary form, because it's a way to communicate with someone who can't communicate back.
Do we have other questions?
Just a comment here. You said that you don't like that line, but gee, it's in print already, it's in the book. That didn't stop down the hall.
I
You
know.
kept changing his poems all the time. I was at a reading and he's reading and he talked about how I changed the poem and it was in a magazine, then I changed it, then it was part of the proof of this book. And he goes, even now, I just changed it. He held the book up and in the book crossed out with the new revision.
Yeah, I think Robert Lowell did that too.
Isn't there a certain point though that the poem becomes an artifact?
Yes, I think so. I'm not gonna go in and change. I accept, also I think you have to accept that your books are imperfect and your work is imperfect. And then I think the conversation about that line is maybe more interesting than the line. This dialogue with each other is probably just as important. So it's good to have the line that maybe still makes me go,
Other questions, observations? Anxieties?
Anxieties?
Anxieties, they're always interesting. So
I mean, I have anxiety right now. If you don't, I wonder what's wrong with you, right? Because there's a lot to be anxious
I
about.
think so. Can't wait for the next book.